Okay, let's get started with today's training, how to find more slam dunk opportunities, slam dunk federal opportunities, right? And that's what I want for you. When I talk with businesses across the country, people who are in the GovCon space, a lot of times I hear that they're running into not being able to find opportunities. And you might see something like this. They're not able to find opportunities that are solidly within their core competency. And that's a challenge that I believe we can address when we talk about finding slam dunk opportunities, right? And so the solution is to, in my opinion, to become a farmer, and you're going to reap what you sow in the federal government space with federal government program offices and with teammates. You'll reap what you sow. Don't wait for something to happen. Make it happen, right? Don't wait for it to happen. Make it happen. In today's training, I'm going to cover three main bullets as we go forward in this fire hose worth of training. The first thing I want to cover is just how to be a farmer and not a hunter, how to farm a federal agency and strategic teaming partners. And then the last one is I want to try to talk to you about cooperative farming with other government contractors. Sometimes you think about cooperative farming where maybe everybody owns the land and they come in and work. So we'll talk about what does that mean when I say it related to the federal government space. So if this sounds good to you, if this is the training you're looking to get and you're excited about finding more slam dunk opportunities in the federal market, do me a favor, put slam dunk ops into the chat. Slam dunk ops into the chat. Monica, I love that. I love that chat. I don't often look at the chat. If you haven't been here before, I focus really heavily on the training, and I come back to the chat later. Gus and I do. And but Monica, I just noticed you're making it happen. I'm like, I'm here making it happen. You're here making it happen. We are here making it happen. So let's talk about what the difference is between a farmer and hunter when I talk about it this way, right? I'm actually going to talk about it in real terms and then government contracting terms. So first, when you think about hunting and what hunters do, hunters wait, farmers work. And I'm going to come back to farmers in a second, but hunters wait and farmers work. Think about deer hunting. Don't think about it too much if it scares you, but think about deer hunting, right? Hunters get in a stand, they wait for the deer to walk by, and then they pop it, kill it. It's a brutal thing. Good meat, but brutal. And, when you think about that, you're just waiting for it to happen. And I'm going to describe this more in a little bit, but sales is kind of that same thing. Sometimes we just wait for the opportunities to walk by. And when it gets in our crosshairs, we kill it. We're hunting it. We think we just land it, right? But that's not really the way that life works. And even in hunting, people often go out and come back with nothing, right? Because they're completely dependent on the deer walking by. Hunting is a single day activity. When you think about it, just like I said, people sometimes go out and they come back. A single day activity is you're going out and you're hoping you have results. You're not doing anything to make it happen. You're prepared to embrace it if it happens to you, but you're not doing anything to make it happen. Hunting is this activity where you just go out and wait. And so when you think about hunting and being a hunter, it's a reactive activity. And when we think about it in the federal space, that's a reactive approach to your sales. You have goals and you're waiting for things to happen instead of making that happen. And so let's talk about farming, right? Farmers, I said, work. Where hunters wait, farmers work. And you can think about this, right? A hunter sits around with a gun getting ready to shoot, where a farmer goes out in the field and toils. So a farmer works. They're proactive. They don't just wait for things to happen. They make things happen. And so imagine if a farmer wants bread on their table, right? After they're determining that goal, after they determine that goal of what they want, they then reverse engineer the process to see what's needed in order for them to reach that goal. In order for them to have bread on the plate, what do they need to do? And sometimes they plan months and even years in advance. You hear us sometimes talk about 6 to 24 months is the sales cycle in the federal government space. Well, hunters wait till the end and try to shoot it. Farmers try to be part of the entire process. And that's where I really want you to go when you think about the difference between being a hunter and a farmer. So if that makes sense, and if you'd rather be a proactive, take a proactive approach to your sales than a reactive approach, then put proactive in the chat. In fact, you can put I am proactive. I am proactive. I'm proactive in the chat. Let me know that you want to be a farmer and make things happen to you rather than let them happen to you. So let me give you another example of in much more depth of how much that farmer is reverse engineering or really looking at their goal and saying what needs to be done. I'm going to use an example with bread, and then I'll come back and use an example with an opportunity for example. Okay, so imagine you're a farmer, right? Your goal, like I said, is to have bread to eat. You want to eat bread and you want to have bread on your table for your family. Before you can eat bread, you need to make bread, right? And there's all this activity that goes into what does it take to make bread. Do you need a roller? Do you need a machine to deal with it, et cetera? But that's all just part of making bread. So before you can eat it, you must make it. Before you can make bread, you must have flour, let's say, right? And in order to have flour, you must harvest wheat, right? You must go out into the fields, harvest wheat, and bring that wheat in and process it in whatever way that we process wheat to make flour. Clearly, I'm not a farmer. In order to have wheat, though, you must harvest it. And that means you must have watered and cared for the crop. You can't harvest wheat unless you have wheat that it grew. And the only way it's going to grow is if you care for that crop. Watering is an example of care, right? Tending to that crop. But before you can have a crop of wheat to even tend to, you must plant those seeds, right? You got to get the seeds in the ground for the wheat to start growing. But you can't plant the seeds in the ground unless you've created rows in the soil. Right? So you need to go through the soil and put that row that you can then drop the sand on. And you need to till that land, though, in order for it to become soil. You can't just have soil. You can't just show up the land and go, oh, there's soil. Any farmer will show you, any gardener will show you, you've got to do a lot of work to create good soil that allow you to have the rows, that allow you to plant the seeds going back, et cetera, to our bread, right? Before you can till the land, this is what the farmer's thinking. They're going farther and back, right? They've got land, but before they can till it, they need to go in there with a backhoe or something and or a couple of oxen and remove these big stones, right? Get them out of the way so they can do that. But they can't do any of that unless they own the land, right? You can't go in there and just start working land that's not yours. And so they have to own the land. And if they're going to own the land, they have to go through this process of negotiating with whoever has it to buy the land. Right? And sometimes that's taken a lot of effort, and that'll take months on end. And all of that began when that farmer was determining they want bread. In our case, when we said we want sales, when we determine the end, when we begin with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey says, then we can begin to reverse engineer or think about all the steps like that farmer just did. What are the things I need to do in order to have bread? And I want you to think that same way with sales in the federal government space. If I want this goal in the federal government space, what do I need to do? Right? And so let's go ahead and walk through. By the way, if that makes sense, that scenario I just walked through with bread and how the farmer has to do all these steps in order to make bread, but they began with the end in mind. Bread. I want to eat bread. I want to have bread on my table. Put in the chat, begin with the end in mind. Let's give a little shout out to Stephen Covey, right? Begin with the end in mind. By the way, quick break. If you don't know who Stephen Covey is, he wrote this book called 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. And one of the habits is begin with the end in mind. And that's what farmers do. That's what we do. That's what makes us proactive. So put in the chat, begin with the end in mind. Okay, so I want to share an image of our 7-step process. And many of you have seen this before, but I want to walk you through the difference between a hunter and a farmer in the federal government space as it relates to the 7-step process. So in order to have success in the federal government, in order to make revenue, you need to follow this 7-step process. I've simplified this way down to say, here's the 7 steps in order to succeed. Well, a hunter will sit right between opportunities and proposals. You see this white wedge kind of thing or arrow? They'll sit right there waiting for an RFP to drop. They'll sit there and wait for a bid to come out or a request for bids to come in. They might even be in that RFI phase, but they're not doing anything to develop it. They're just waiting for something to come out on sam.gov or something like that and then respond to it. And so that's what hunters do. They sit there and they wait for something to walk by. Very late in the game, right? So if you want sales as a farmer, if that's your goal, then you need to reverse engineer it and walk back and say, I need to submit proposals out there, right? This is harvesting the wheat. And you can use your memory to apply the examples back to growing bread. But in order for me to have proposals, I need to have slam dunk opportunities. That's what we're talking about today, right? Slam dunk opportunities in the pipeline. But I'm not just going to find slam dunk opportunities, right? I'm going to go out there and plant the seeds. I'm going to create the rows. I'm going to till the land so I have good soil. And I do that by having relationships with strategic teaming partners and federal agencies, the buyers, right? And in order for me to have those relationships, to be tending to my crops and tilling the soil, whatever that those kind of middle phases are, that's relationship. You're managing the relationships. Those will all lead to your crop of opportunities. And in order to have relationships, if you just keep reverse engineering this as a farmer does, you must reach out to somebody. I talk about call at least 2 people a day, if not 5 people a day. In fact, I'm putting out a book sometime soon, and in there it says one of the things successful government contractors do is they call 5 new people a day. And so that's outreach, right? It doesn't take a lot of time, 30 minutes or less, to call 5 new people a day. But that's outreach, and that's you working that land. And in order to outreach, you need to do targeting. You need to determine, this is kind of buying the land, if you will, or removing the big rocks. You're preparing the land by, in this case, finding people's names, numbers, and emails. You're targeting the right strategic partners and agency buyer personnel to be able to start outreaching. All of that begins with research. All of that begins with determining you want a sale at the end, determining you want that sale at Department of Homeland Security, determining that we plant corn or we plant risk management framework or ATO kind of stuff or ServiceNow, right? Determining all that stuff that you want at the end. When you start researching, you start finding that best plot of land, that agency that best fits what you're trying to do. So as you go back through the process of trying to succeed, think about farming as you go back, right? You want to reverse engineer the process of how do you achieve the sale that you're trying to get to. So if you understand the 7-step process, put 7-step process in the chat. If you'd like a copy of that handout for the 7-step process, if you don't have that already, put 7-step process into the chat and we'll get that to you. So the last part I want to kind of wrap up here with is how can you farm, right? I'm talking about finding more slam dunk opportunities. And one of the ways you find more slam dunk opportunities is that you develop more slam dunk opportunities. You farm them and you create them. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you can farm, right? So there's several different ways you can farm, or several different things you can farm, if you think of it that way. Areas you can farm, crops that could be your farming crop. And those are opportunities, right? You can farm opportunities. You're trying to, that's your output. That's what you want to harvest, is opportunities that are slam dunk opportunities. You can also farm relationships. These are relationships with federal agency or teaming partner type folks. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then the last thing is you can farm proposal responses, proposal content. And you want to write winning proposals. I didn't say this in today's training, but that 7-step process, you're not submitting just proposals, you're submitting winning proposals. And there's a certain way I describe what is a winning proposal. And it's similar to how I say you don't just want opportunities in your pipeline, you want slam dunk opportunities. These are opportunities that are absolutely in your sweet spot. And winning proposals are ones that are absolutely going to wow the evaluation team on the government buyer side. So you want to have winning proposals in there, and you can farm those as well. Let me walk you through a little bit of how on these. And so if you think about opportunities, I described this a little bit, but one of the ways you can farm opportunities, and this is a way that you got to consider, but if you're a little bit more cutting edge, emerging technology type stuff, and a couple of buzzwords that pop into my head are like zero trust, ServiceNow, because it's such a hot technology, anything to do with artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like that, right? If you've got expertise in that area, even in SharePoint and some of these, like SharePoint can go with ServiceNow in that sense. But one of the ways to farm is to think about developing the new opportunity within a program office. And so what a lot of us are unaware of is we can go help the government even create an opportunity. You don't have to wait for it to come out on the forecast. You don't have to wait for it to come out as an RFI or source of SOT or an RFP, right? You don't have to wait for it. You can go into a program office and get them to think about things in your way. So if I thought about artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is my current favorite, right? If I started a new company, that's the space I'd be in. In artificial intelligence, machine learning, it can be used everywhere. But one of the ways that I know it can be used is together with data. So there's 2 particular areas I might go into, and I'm walking you through the scenario of how I'm farming an opportunity. Some of the farming activities I described earlier with bread, here it would be getting into the chief data officer. Every federal agency now has a chief data officer. This person's in charge of the overall governance and direction of data, protection and use of data within their agency. Well, if they are in charge of the data, then they are working with all these business unit customers who have a need to make smarter decisions, faster decisions, more data-driven decisions. Machine learning and artificial intelligence can help with that. So I can get in there and begin to talk to the chief data officer about, hey, here's how you might be able to, how business units might be able to improve their capabilities, whether it's a VA hospital and how they can deliver better quality of care to the customers, whether it's Army and how they can provide better training to the soldiers, things like that. But it's my responsibility to get in there and to talk with them about how they can use machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, together with data to help a business unit. The second level of where I could do farming on that same example is I could just go right to the business unit. So I might go to the hospital. I did this in my last company where I would always go downstream, meaning to the lowest program office or lowest office. I would go downstream to directors who were in charge of departments, like the director of logistics at a hospital, or director of pharmacy or pathology and laboratory medicine services. I would go in there and talk about their needs. They really weren't being heard a lot from people way, way up at the top of headquarters, but I could be down there understanding their needs and beginning to help them think about how they can submit requests. And this is farming, where you teach your program office how they can submit a request for what they need, right? This is selling. You're giving them the information they need to go ask their bosses or the budget authorities for funding. Maybe not immediately, but next year. So that's an example of a way to do it with opportunities. Another example that's vital with opportunities is to look at a forecast, right? Imagine a forecast is, it's kind of like a pre-planted farm, if you will. Somebody has already come along, the government, and planted seeds into the rows. So all that early stuff is done with the forecast. Well, now you can go in there and look at the opportunities, the crops, if you will, and decide which ones match with you. And now you can tend to that crop that the government planted. And I know I'm taking this analogy as far as I can, but imagine that those forecasted opportunities in an agency forecast are just different rows. And some rows are IT, some are construction, some are ServiceNow or whatever, right? And you just go to the row, the forecasted opportunity, and you begin to tend to it. This is capture, right? You want to sit there and begin to grow that opportunity. Get in and talk with the program office, figure out who that even is. Get in and talk with the KO and the small business specialist. Let them know that you want to do this work, that you can do this work. Let them know that you want to learn more about their challenges and their needs, so that when you do write a response, that your response is really addressing their needs, their requirement, right? And so that's a way of farming an opportunity. And there's many other examples I can do with this, but the biggest lesson I can leave with you on the farming opportunities is we call that shifting left. If you wait for the RFP, if you wait for the RFI even, you're kind of addressing it when everybody's there. But so there's a lot of hunters waiting. They're waiting for things to drop as an RFI or an RFP. But farming is coming left, shifting left in that sales process, where you're coming earlier and you're tilling that ground, you're planting the seeds. If you find seeds, you're harvesting it all before it gets to the RFI and the source of sod. And so shift left and you'll be able to farm opportunities more. If that made sense about this need to shift left in order to farm opportunities, put shift left in the chat. And I'm going to talk about this same thing as it relates to relationships, right? You can farm relationships with federal agencies and with teammates, strategic partners, by just following that 7-step process, going all the way back to the beginning. If you think about a sale as I want a strategic relationship, what does that mean? Well, that means we're meeting on a regular basis every 2-3 weeks or something, and we're talking openly about needs and solutions. That's a good strategic relationship. Well, if you begin to reverse engineer it, and if I just share for one quick second on this, if you reverse engineer a relationship, sales is a relationship, proposals might be a TA, opportunities might be an NDA. You see where I'm going with this? Relationships is a regular meeting where you're talking about pipelines. You're coming together for 30 minutes every couple of weeks. And so if you look at that, though, it begins with research. If you want those strategic relationships that will lead to opportunities, that will have people bringing you opportunities, agencies or or strategic partners, then you need to develop those relationships. And it begins with research, understanding who they are, showing them that you care, right? People don't care what you know until they know that you care. Researching them will help that. I had a customer, we have a customer currently who just had an opportunity brought to them. It was completely cold in there, but it was because they had been doing some of this research and they understood it and they put themselves where the customer needed to be, that the customer thought of them, right? And they brought that opportunity to them. They hadn't heard about this opportunity beforehand. And that's what I want with you as well, is you're developing these relationships through your farming activities, right? You're actually taking the time to work on those relationships, harvesting them, protecting them, right? Watering them when it gets too hot, taking care of the bugs are coming in and infesting it, right? Taking out the weeds, compared to just waiting for relationships, being reactive to some relationship magically, some person magically falling in professional love with you and saying, oh, you're so great, I'm going to give you everything I know, right? That doesn't happen that way. They know so many people like that. But if you take the time to harvest that relationship and really care for that relationship, you're farming relationships, and those relationships will produce bread, literally in our case, kind of bread with a dollar sign. And then the last one is, I just want to talk briefly about proposal responses, how you can think about farming responses, right? And these proposal content for RFIs or RFPs. When you do this, what you're doing, in my opinion, is you're doing that same reverse engineering farming activity where you're looking at, how do I create more and more content that is ready? And if you've ever heard somebody say, hey, you should have reusable content, and you have this example of a proposal you wrote here, and this example you wrote here, and something else, and you've got a whole folder of other stuff, that's not organized, right? And that's just a mess that you're gonna have to work on when you get to it. What I mean is taking something like, I know SharePoint, so let me use that for 1 second. In SharePoint, they migrate from SharePoint servers that are in their agency buildings and up to the cloud, to Microsoft Cloud, right? So if they're going to migrate from one place to another, and they're going to migrate all these thousands of users and all these hundreds of business critical apps, these apps that help run the business, they're going to migrate it. Well, I want to have a response that is rock solid. I don't have to look anywhere else. It's a standalone response that says, when you migrate, these are the top 5 things you should be concerned about. And when you keep yourself concerned about it, this is the result. You will have this benefit, something like that, right? And what I want you to think about from a farming perspective is have a paragraph where you can say this in 1 or 2 paragraphs, what you mean about your migration tips, and then expand it. You can have a whole section, which might take up a couple of pages, that is, or a whole single page, right? That is, here's my migration tips. And then the last one is pages, having several pages that speak to the migration. And the reason you want this ready is because that's your approach. When you write an RFI response or RFP response, there is only one technical approach that you have. Excuse me. There's only one approach you should have. You shouldn't be writing an approach every time. So if you have a core competency that's nailed down, then begin to farm your response content. Make sure you have this stuff sitting there. It's not sitting in some other response where you're going to pull it out, but it sits here and it could stand alone as an award-winning blog about migration, for example, or elevator safety, things like that I've talked about before. But take the time to create this content ahead of time for your RFPs and RFIs, and you'll be ready. You'll be farming that information that you need, so it's ready, so that you can harvest it when the proposals come out, or the RFP or the RFI come out. So you can farm opportunities, relationships, proposal responses. You can look at farming that activity of reverse engineering, beginning with the end in mind, and get a lot of stuff done through this farming approach. So if you understand that and you're a farmer, put "be a farmer" or "I'm a farmer" into the chat. Okay, so there's 3 things we talked about, and I want to give you one last tip as we wrap up our time here. First off, just on the 3 things that we talked about, right? Hunting is a reactive approach and farming is proactive. So be proactive in achieving your goals. Second thing is reverse engineer those goals. Think about that 7-step process: sales, proposal, opportunities, relationship, outreach, targeting, research, right? Reverse engineer that, get back to the research, and you'll start achieving those goals just by reverse engineering them. And the third one is you can farm opportunities and relationships, right? And your content. And so keep that in mind, that when I talk about reverse engineering, it's all aspects of your business as you're trying to reach your goals. So my tip for you, my suggestion for when you walk away today and you connect with your team and say, hey, I watched this great training. Do me a favor, ask yourself, ask your team, are we farming or are we hunting? Are we reactive? Are we proactive? Are we waiting or are we working? Right? So ask your team, are we farming? Are we hunting? And if you do that, you'll begin to have a better conversation about how you can actually get on your table the bread that you want. Okay, so if you'd like to work with me and my team, we do have a BD Accelerator workshop. I'd love to work with you if you're in the right space. Usually that's like $1 million or more in revenue already. And to learn more, go ahead and shoot me a direct message in LinkedIn chat. Okay, remember, government contracting, it is not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next training.